Career Speaker Series. And our hope is that you will be empowered to begin exploring your own career path. In case we haven't met, I'm Mrs. Gentine. I'm your Experiential Learning Coordinator, and my role is to help connect you with experiences as you navigate your own personal career journey. So welcome to all of our Mason Middle School and High School students today. Mr. Reuter is also joining us. He and I have been working together on this virtual series. So Mr. Reuter, I think you have a few things you want to tell us before I introduce our speaker.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. Just a couple things as far as etiquette goes, which you all have been doing an awesome job with. As you come in, make sure you mute your microphone. In the top right of the screen is a little box with a couple lines. That's the chat feature. So if there are some questions as Mr. Johansson is presenting that pop up and you want to ask, type them in the chat and we'll be able to get those questions answered as we go. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Well, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Brad Johansson. He's the news anchor and reporter for WCMH-TV in Columbus. He spent a long time of his career here in Cincinnati. You may recognize him as a familiar face, but you also may recognize him as a familiar face to a husband and father to some of our very own Mason Comets. So thank you so much for taking the time today, and we'll turn it over to you.
Well, happy to help. Just as a, Deb, do you want just a little background as to where I came from, how I got here kind of thing?
Sure. I think a lot of our students who have interest maybe in journalism, public relations, they're wondering, how did you get there? How did you know that was for you? And what kind of things did you do along the way?
I was one of those weird ones. So I started knowing that this is what I wanted to do probably by the time I was in 5th grade. I did a project for a teacher, Mr. Suspanic at the time, where we had to interview somebody famous. And it was just supposed to be a quick 2-minute interview. You guys may not even remember these things, but we had cassette tapes. We had to do cassette tapes on cassette players and do that interview. And we had to, one of us had to be the interviewer, one of us had to be the somebody famous kind of thing. And way back in my 5th grade, Hank Aaron was getting ready to break Babe Ruth's home run record. And I wanted to interview Hank Aaron. And I had so many questions about it that my interview that was supposed to be 2 minutes took up the entire class. And Mr. Suspanic said, you know, you can actually do something like this for a living. And it was, I knew at that time I didn't want to be the somebody famous. I wanted to interview people who were impacting other people. And it kind of grew from there. And so from 5th grade on, I knew that that was part of it. I knew that I wanted to do some play-by-play. I loved sports. And I kind of continued to follow that path. Somebody got me into a speech team when I was in high school. And that probably turned it for me. Because I learned how to write, I learned how to edit, I learned how to present different things. And by the time I was in college, I had joined a speech team that was the best in the nation. And in my junior year, we won the national championship at Bradley University and then won it for the next 12 straight years after that. And in my senior year, I was named the outstanding speaker in the country, but while I was doing that, I was working at a television station. So I was on air by the time I was a sophomore in college because I knew I wanted to go to a school where I could get my hands on television equipment and figure out how to do this. But the speech team helped me learn prose, poetry, extemporaneous speaking, where somebody gives you a topic and you have to create your own. I did dramatic duet. With comedy. I did my own oratory. So in learning how to present, I learned how to make a speech to 2 people and to 2,000 people and try and create a way that people would be interested either way. So that was kind of a little bit of my background. I never really wavered from that very much. And I've been on the air since the time I'm 20. So that's 37 years for me now in television and continuing to do this. So that gives you a little bit of background. And I looked for universities, like I said, that were going to allow me to touch television equipment immediately. And Bradley was one of those that was probably 2.5 hours away from my home in Chicago. And Indiana was another choice. Wisconsin was another choice. I had some other universities that I looked to, but I wanted to stay closer to home, and I wanted to get on the air as fast as I could. And Bradley provided me that opportunity.
That's great. I think that's real important that you pointed that out, because a lot of our juniors and seniors that are joining us, I think they feel that pressure sometimes of knowing if it's the right school. And there are so many great schools, especially here in the Midwest. But you pointed out you wanted to go to a school that provided some opportunities for you and allowed you to have those experiences. So I think that's a really good tip for some of our students who are looking at colleges and trying to differentiate.
Yeah, there's a lot of places that you can go and do, quote unquote, the same thing. But you need to look for the things that bring out the opportunities that you're really looking to zoom in on. Is it class size? Is it expertise of where they go? Is it the opportunity to intern? Is it the opportunity to travel? Is it something that you want bigger because you want a football team? University I went to didn't have a football team, so I missed out on that big fun of 100,000 people watching on Saturdays. We were a smaller school. It was only about 5,000 kids. And I got the experiences that I wanted to because I was really focused on what I wanted to get to once I got out of college.
That's great. Did you happen to have a mentor along the way?
I probably looked to a bunch of people who had gone before me, and anywhere I went, I looked for somebody who was better than I was at what I wanted to do. And I would find a lot of those people in play-by-play on TV. I would find them as newscasters in what I was watching in Chicago. And then in speech team, once I got onto a team, I would find out the people who were really good at what they did and then pick their brain. So I had a lot of people. I could give names, but there were so many people along the way that led me. And my desire was I want to be good. And if I found somebody who I thought was really good at what they did, instead of getting jealous about that, I would say, I love what you do. Teach me how I can be better at what I want to do.
That's a great attitude to have. What other careers could you do? Well, what was your major, and what other careers could you pursue had you not been fortunate enough to have this route?
I majored in, at the time in Bradley, I double majored in what was speech production management, so that I could get involved in the behind the scenes of television, and broadcast journalism that was focused on presentation and AP writing. And then I minored in theater, and I did a lot of stage productions. I worked in musicals. I worked on stage and behind stage because I wanted to be kind of in front of the camera all the time. And I knew that. So whatever form of presentation I could get into, I did. And I think I've told people all the time, especially with those who have interned underneath me, I've said, if you can write and you can write well, there aren't a whole lot of jobs you can't do. This is all about communication, and people are looking, especially now, for people who communicate to them well. Speaking, writing, social interaction, making people feel comfortable becomes public relations, it becomes sales, it becomes group leadership. All of those things are involved in being able to figure out a way to get your message presented to somebody in a way that makes them move. And that may be emotionally through a television story, but it can also be in business in a way that I can't get anybody to explain this to me. And if you have somebody that's able to get that done, there's jobs everywhere for something like that.
Is there anyone that stands out in your mind that you interviewed that really had an impact on you?
Hmm. I had a lot of those. I mean, some of you may remember the Lauryn Hill story that of the girl who contracted DIPG cancer and wanted to play a college basketball game before she died. And that ended up taking a lot of years of my life and following her, even though we only followed her for 6 months. We ended up with a documentary on her. It became a huge part of my wife and I foundational charity. Um, I was impacted by her because she had a sole goal of making every day the most that she could in the time that she had left. And I think in this pandemic, we're getting that message as well. What am I going to do with today just so I can survive the day? And Lauren was one of those who decided that she was going to use what everybody would say is the worst possible diagnosis to change other people and change the world. I remember very early on in my career interviewing Sparky Anderson, who was the former manager of the Cincinnati Reds. And Sparky had, there are people that have, sounds silly, there are people that have auras, and that when they walk into a room, they're different than everyone else. And Sparky had that aura. And I remember Sparky walking into the studio and talking to production assistants. What is your name? And he went to every different person. And when he walked out of the interview with me, he said everybody's name as he walked out. And I said, never seen that before. And he said, Brad, if you just remember a person's name, it makes them feel special. And that's what we're here to do, is to make people feel special. So there are some of those people who have that gravitas, that have had the wisdom, and that are able to share that with other people. Those are a couple that stick out to me.
Those are great words of wisdom. I'm glad you shared those with us. Students, as Mr. Reuter mentioned earlier, feel free to go up to the top right, and you can chat or text in any questions that you may have right now. So we'll be watching for those. I know one question that some of our, and I think you've answered this one, was what classes would you recommend taking as a high school student? And even though you didn't particularly say that, I heard theater, I heard a lot of writing, a lot of communications courses, public speaking, getting involved in speech team. Is there anything else that you can think of that our students might want to think about as they're scheduling classes?
You guys have a fantastic newspaper. I know that because my daughter works on the Chronicle. Being involved, I would always tell kids to get involved in as much as interests you, and then maybe some things that you go, if I have to do that, I'm not sure I want to, and then do that too, because it's important for you to find out, maybe more important, what you don't want to do than what you do want to do. Because if you get stuck in something that is going to drive you nuts, but that's a requirement, you better figure out that you need to go a different direction. Because work's no fun if it feels like work all the time. English, anything in reading, anything in public speaking. I did a photography class that was maybe the most difficult class I ever took in college. And gosh, what else would I throw out there?
Brad, we had a student ask, could you major in English in college and still go into sports journalism?
Sure, but you'd have to. You could use that as a major, but you're going to have to get into a communications program to be able to have that as a background. And while doing that, probably more now than ever within this business, internships and the ability within your university to have an ability to go to a station that surrounds where you're going to school, to be able to get involved in a program that gives you an idea within a television station or a radio station what you're going to have to do. Will provide that. Your major won't necessarily preclude you from doing that, but you'll have to get into a journalism program, at least in a minor way, to be able to get involved into a station.
Great answer. And you mentioned the Chronicle as maybe an opportunity for our students to gather or to gain these experiences. And prior to going to college, we have a lot of great internal internships for students, such as the Chronicle, NBC, etc. And so, excuse me, sorry, my phone was ringing. So students, I would encourage you to get some of these experiences under your belt while you're in high school, because we're very fortunate in Mason to have these internal internships.
Yeah, what you have at Mason High School beats half the colleges in the country, with what preparation is there for you and your ability to kind of dip your toe into things just to try them out and figure out whether it's something you like, don't like, want to move more towards. The opportunities that you guys have, just it's ridiculously good.
I saw a question, a couple of coming through. So good, great. Students keep sending your questions. One of them that came up is, how do we secure internal internships? The way you find those is you schedule them in your courses. Some of them require an application. So Mr. Dale Connor is one of our teachers that you certainly will want to meet and get in contact with for internal. As far as external internships, I don't know, maybe Mr. Johansson could direct us to what he sees at the station. And, do you need to be in college to do that?
The internships that you will in, for example, the Cincinnati stations, we usually don't take anybody until they're past their freshman year in college to work through a summer program. But there's always shadowing opportunities as high schoolers that people can go into the station for the day, find out what a day looks like in a newsroom. You get off school, go from 3, stay through the 6 o'clock news, and you can walk through the station and find out the different opportunities within that give you that opportunity. I saw one of the questions was, did I have an internship that led to the job I had now? Yes. When I got to college, I've kind of been obnoxious all my life, and I was obnoxious in trying to find, where can I get on TV? And so I went to my communications director and I said, lead me. Tell me where I need to go to get into a television station. And in my sophomore year, I got an internship into a sports department at an NBC station in Peoria, Illinois. And I worked for them 2 days a week. And by the time I had finished 6 months of my internship, because they allowed me to stay, they needed somebody on air. And I had worked so hard that I had done a lot of speech, theater presentation, that my on-camera presence was good enough at 20 years old that I was anchoring 2 days a week while I was a junior and senior in college, while I was going to school. And that led me to my first job. And I've told a lot of my interns who've come through, unless you love this, you don't want to do it. The hours stink. The money starting out isn't very good. You have to do a ton of different jobs beyond what your main job is. And unless you kind of have that passion for this is really in me, I want to do this and it drives me. And then we complain after a 16-hour day, but we wake up and can't wait to go back to it again. That's what drives you. But that's why I say do what you need to do to find out what you can't put up with. That's really, really important. And in seeking out what you're looking for, I say this especially in this political climate right now, I watch a lot of stuff that is the opposite of what my opinion is. So I can better understand where somebody else is coming from rather than just listening to what is my normal way of thinking. And I think the more breadth that you have of understanding of how other people think, the more you can move into creating a platform to bring people together.
Great advice. I think I saw another question. It's from a middle school student, and it says, what advice would you have for a middle school journalist trying to cover the news?
You got lots of time. That is, if here's what I did, even as a middle school student, play-by-play was one of my things that I wanted to do. I would grab a friend, sit down on a couch, put up a game, turn down the volume, and call my own game with my friend. And we'd laugh through that, and it created just kind of a new environment of experimentation. And I think in middle school, that's where you are. Experiment. If you want to cover the news, pick something out of the newspaper. This is what I did in high school. There was a competition in speech called radio speaking. And I had to create my own 3-minute newscast out of stuff that I found in the newspaper. And newspapers are going away. But you can create them online. If you have stories that you want to do, take somebody else's view, figure out how you would write it, and create your own webcast, newscast. You have the ability now, as to what we're doing right now. You can create your own newscast. You can write your own things online. You can share your own opinion, which is in the newspaper an op-ed, an opinion paper that you guys could put together and say, here's what I think about this. And experimentation in junior high should be the fun of it. You're not making this a job. You're trying to create something that enhances your passion for something, and being able to play with it with the amount of opportunity that you have with social media and online and computer graphics right now is so far beyond what we ever thought of when I was growing up, that it should be a playground for you to try and figure out what you want to do.
Love that. Any other questions from our students? Okay. Well, we really appreciate your time. That was also terrific advice about trying out things that maybe are outside of your comfort zone so that you can see what you don't want to do. Sometimes I like to share with students, by the time you graduate from high school, you will have spent 16,000 hours of your life in school. But if you start working after college and you work until retirement, you get to spend 90,000 hours working on the average.
Right.
So do something you love. And it's very apparent, Mr. Johansson, that you love what you're doing. And we really appreciate you taking the time today to speak with us.
Absolutely. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Everyone have a good day.